October 17th, 11:42 p.m. A kitchen lit by a single overhead bulb. The house is silent except for the low mechanical hum of the refrigerator. A ceramic mug rests untouched on the counter. Steam no longer rises from it. He is standing there, not moving, replaying a conversation that already ended hours ago. The words he didn't say. The clarifications he could have offered. The subtle defense of why he prefers to be alone. You can almost feel the weight of it in his chest, that familiar tightening, that reflex to justify, to explain, to make sure he isn't misunderstood. But tonight, something unusual happens. The rehearsal doesn't begin. No internal courtroom opens. No imaginary audience assembles. No carefully constructed speech forms in the back of his mind. Just silence. Not numbness, not exhaustion, something quieter, something firmer. He picks up the mug, takes a sip, and instead of reconstructing the argument, he lets the misunderstanding stand. That is the moment. It doesn't look dramatic, no thunder, no visible shift, but internally an era ends. For years, maybe decades, the mind has been training for invisible trials, preparing statements no one officially requested, crafting explanations for choices that never needed defending. Why you don't attend every gathering. Why you need time alone. Why your ambitions changed. Why your relationships ended. The persona, the socially negotiated self, has been on duty. From a Jungian perspective, the persona is the mask designed for belonging. It keeps social equilibrium. It translates your complexity into something digestible. It smooths rough edges so others can recognize you. But it costs energy. And for a long time, you were willing to pay. Because being misunderstood once felt dangerous. Misunderstanding used to mean exclusion, rejection, loss of love, loss of safety, loss of identity itself. So you explained, you refined, you corrected the narrative. You tried to control how you were seen. Tonight, that impulse does not activate. Instead, there is a strange realization, almost disorienting in its calm. If they don't understand, nothing collapses. The refrigerator hum continues, the house remains standing, your heartbeat doesn't accelerate. No emergency. He walks to the window. Outside, a streetlight casts a pale orange circle onto empty pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a car passes, that's all. No applause for maturity, no ceremony for growth. Just the quiet withdrawal of energy from an old defense. You can almost hear the mind testing it. Is this indifference? Is this giving up? Is this isolation? But it doesn't feel like withdrawal from life. It feels like returning something borrowed. Earlier that evening, someone had said it casually. I just don't get you anymore. There was a time when that sentence would have detonated something internal. It would have sent him scrambling for clarity. Now it lands and dissolves. Not because he doesn't care, but because he no longer equates being understood with being valid. And that distinction changes everything. From a Jungian lens, this is the beginning of a structural shift. Energy once invested in maintaining the outer mask begins moving inward toward what Jung called the center of the personality, the part not shaped by negotiation. It can feel like distance to others. It can look like detachment. Friends might notice you speak less, offer fewer explanations, leave misunderstandings uncorrected. They might assume you've grown colder. But what if something else is happening? What if the nervous system no longer interprets misunderstanding as a threat? What if the need to explain was never about clarity, but about survival? The mug is empty now. He places it in the sink. The porcelain sound echoes lightly against metal. There is no dramatic vow, no internal speech declaring independence. Just a quiet decision not to chase understanding anymore. And that is where the deeper question begins to surface, not loudly but persistently. If you no longer need to be understood, who are you trying to convince all along? The night offers no answer. But something inside already knows the investigation has begun. June 3, 2018, a conference room on the 14th floor. Fluorescent lights hum overhead. A long glass table reflects the faces seated around it. Laptops open, notebooks aligned, someone clears their throat. He is mid-sentence. Explaining. clarifying a decision that technically requires no defense, yet he hears himself adding context, softening edges, anticipating objections before they form. You can almost see it happen, the subtle recalibration of tone, the careful selection of words designed to prevent friction. I just think this direction aligns better long-term, he says, then quickly adds, but I understand the concern. The room nods, the meeting moves on. But something lingers. Not in the room. Inside. Because this is not about strategy, it never was. It is about the old reflex, the persona stepping forward before the inner self even speaks. From a Jungian perspective, the persona develops early. It is intelligent, adaptive, protective. It learns what earns approval and what creates tension. It crafts a version of you that can move through the world without constant threat. In childhood, this mask is necessary. You learn to smile at the right time, to tone down intensity, to amplify humor, to minimize sensitivity. You learn which parts of you receive warmth and which parts receive silence. And slowly, almost invisibly, you begin editing yourself in real time. Not because you are false, but because belonging matters. The persona becomes a uniform, and like any uniform, it signals something specific: competence, agreeableness, stability. You wore it well. You refined it. You became fluent in the art of being understood. Or at least being accepted. But here is the quiet truth that begins surfacing in adulthood. The more skilled you become at presenting the acceptable version of yourself, the further you drift from the center. Not dramatically, gradually. Like a compass needle that shifts a few degrees off course, not enough to notice at first, but enough over years to arrive somewhere unfamiliar. You start to feel slightly out of alignment, slightly performative, slightly tired. The explanations multiply. Why you don't want children. Why you left the career everyone admired. Why you need solitude more than stimulation. Why your values changed. Every explanation seems reasonable, rational, articulate. But beneath them is a deeper tension. You are still negotiating your existence. Even now. Even as an adult. The conference room empties, chairs scrape against the floor. The city skyline glows through wide windows. He lingers behind for a moment, staring at his reflection in the glass. There's that flicker again. A subtle exhaustion. Not from the meeting. From the performance. And the realization is not accusatory, it is almost tender. He has been managing perception for most of his life. From a Jungian lens, this is where individuation begins to whisper. The process of becoming psychologically whole requires withdrawing identification from the mask, not destroying it, not rejecting society, but recognizing it as partial. Temporary. Functional. Not essence. The problem arises when the persona becomes fused with identity, when you forget where the role ends and you begin. And then something destabilizing happens. You start to crave a kind of silence that explanation cannot provide. The silence of not performing. The silence of not persuading. The silence of allowing misunderstanding to exist without correction. But this is terrifying at first. Because if you stop managing perception, who will you be? If you don't clarify your motives, what if they assume the worst? If you don't soften your boundaries, what if they leave? These questions are not intellectual, they are physiological, old, wired into early attachment. The persona once guaranteed survival. That is why it feels dangerous to loosen it. Yet adulthood brings a new variable: you are no longer dependent in the same way. Rejection does not equal extinction. Misunderstanding does not equal exile. And slowly, your nervous system begins updating its data. The uniform feels heavier now. The explanations feel rehearsed. And in quiet moments, late at night or alone in the car or staring at your own reflection, you sense something else underneath the mask. Something steadier. Less eager. Less afraid. The shift does not announce itself. It begins with small experiments. Letting a comment go uncorrected. Not elaborating on your choices. Saying no without a paragraph attached. The world does not collapse. A few people look confused. A few step back. But something inside steps forward. And here is where the transformation deepens. You realize that many of your explanations were never about helping others understand you. They were about helping you feel safe. Safe from judgment. Safe from misinterpretation. Safe from abandonment. So when the need to be understood weakens, it is not arrogance. It is evidence that the inner center has grown stronger than the fear. But that strength carries consequences. Because the moment you stop negotiating your identity, some relationships begin to wobble. And not everyone will stay when you remove the performance. The conference room lights shut off automatically. He walks toward the elevator, reflection fading from the glass. The question is no longer theoretical. If you stop trying to be understood, who exactly were you performing for? And what happens when the audience changes? January 9th, 6:37 a.m. A childhood bedroom still painted the same pale blue. The house is quiet but not peaceful. Floorboards creak in the hallway, a door closes, voices murmur behind walls too thin to hold emotion. He is 8 years old. Sitting on the edge of the bed, listening. Trying to interpret tone. You can almost see the calculation in his eyes, the early scanning for shifts in atmosphere. The way children learn to read the room before they learn to read books. This is where the rehearsal begins. Not in adulthood, not in conference rooms, here. In the small, alert body of a child who senses that harmony is fragile. When the voices rise, he prepares statements in his mind. I didn't mean to. I'll fix it. I was just trying to help. Explanations become tools, not for clarity, for safety. From a Jungian perspective, the developing psyche adapts quickly to preserve attachment. The persona forms around what keeps connection intact, around what prevents withdrawal of warmth. If being quiet earns approval, quiet becomes identity. If being competent reduces tension, competence becomes identity. If being agreeable stabilizes chaos, agreeableness becomes identity. The child learns, if I can explain myself well enough, I won't be rejected. This belief sinks deep. It becomes reflex. It travels forward through years, wearing new clothes, academic achievement, career success, emotional intelligence, but carrying the same core function. Maintain connection, avoid rupture. That is why misunderstanding once felt intolerable. It triggered something ancient. Not disagreement, danger. Fast forward. April 22nd, 9:14 p.m. A dimly lit living room, two adults sitting across from each other. I just don't think we're on the same page anymore. The sentence lands softly, but the body reacts as if bracing for impact. The old system activates. Explain. Clarify. Repair the gap. You can almost feel the surge of energy rising to craft the perfect response, the one that will restore alignment, the one that will prevent distance. But this time something interrupts it. A pause. Longer than usual. And in that pause, a realization emerges, subtle but seismic. Not every gap needs to be closed. Not every misunderstanding is a threat. Not every relationship requires you to contort into coherence for someone else's comfort. The body doesn't believe it at first, it waits for the consequences. Silence stretches between them. No catastrophe. Just two people sitting with difference. From a Jungian lens, this is a critical stage of individuation when the psyche begins separating survival patterns from present reality, when the adult self gently informs the nervous system. We are not 8 anymore. We can survive being misread. We can survive being misinterpreted. We can even survive being left. And here is the uncomfortable truth that surfaces next. Many of your explanations were not about others understanding you. They were about you proving your worth. If they could see your logic, your goodness, your intention, then you were safe. So when someone didn't understand, it felt like erasure. But maturity brings a shift in valuation. Worth is no longer negotiated externally. It stabilizes internally. You start noticing how often you fill silence with justification. How quickly you add context to your boundaries. How instinctively you defend choices that required no defense. And slowly, sometimes reluctantly, you experiment with restraint. You let a misunderstanding remain uncorrected. You allow someone to think you are distant. You resist the urge to provide footnotes to your own existence. The first few times feel unbearable, like standing exposed without armor. But something remarkable happens. The fear does not consume you. Instead, a quiet solidity begins forming underneath the discomfort. A new experience, being misunderstood and remaining intact. This is not indifference. It is differentiation. From a Jungian perspective, the inner center, the self, does not require unanimous validation. It does not collapse when misperceived. It does not rush to manage every projection placed upon it. And as this center strengthens, the persona loosens its grip. You begin to notice which relationships depended on constant explanation, which connections required you to remain legible at all times, which bonds were built not on authenticity, but on performance. Some will deepen when you stop performing. Others will fade. That is the cost of no longer negotiating your identity. The living room conversation ends quietly. No dramatic resolution, no raised voices. Just a mutual recognition of difference. He walks home alone. The night air is cool, streetlights cast long shadows across empty sidewalks. And for the first time, he does not rehearse the conversation on the walk back. No internal edits. No imaginary rebuttals. Just footsteps. And a question that now feels less unsettling, more clarifying. If the need to be understood was born in fear, who are you without that fear? August 28th, 5:52 a.m. A train platform just before sunrise. The sky is a muted gray-blue. The city has not fully awakened. A few scattered commuters stand apart from one another, each wrapped in their own private silence. He stands near the edge of the platform, hands in his coat pockets. No headphones, no phone in hand, just stillness. A younger version of him would have filled this moment. Checked messages. Replayed yesterday's interactions. Rewritten certain responses. But this morning, there is nothing to revise. The train approaches with a low metallic roar. Wind brushes against his face. He doesn't move. There is a steadiness now, not dramatic, not triumphant, but grounded. From a Jungian perspective, this is what happens when psychic energy returns to the center. When the persona no longer consumes most of the fuel, the inner world becomes quieter, less reactive, less dependent on feedback loops. You begin to notice how often others are still rehearsing. How quickly they justify themselves. How urgently they clarify their intentions. How anxiously they seek agreement. And you recognize it not with superiority, but with memory. That used to be you. You can almost feel the invisible conversations happening around you on this platform, people constructing explanations in their heads for interactions that may never come. And you understand something now. The need to be understood is often a hidden negotiation for control. If they understand me, I can influence how they see me. If they see me correctly, they won't misjudge me. If they don't misjudge me, I won't lose belonging. But control is exhausting. And belonging built on constant explanation is fragile. The train doors slide open. Inside, the carriage is half empty. He takes a seat by the window. Reflections overlap, his face merging with passing buildings. There was a time when he needed his reflection confirmed externally. Needed reassurance that he was perceived accurately. But individuation changes that equation. From a Jungian lens, individuation is not about isolation. It is about internal authority, the ability to anchor identity in something deeper than approval. And internal authority does something subtle but powerful. It reduces the urgency to correct projections. People will misunderstand you. They will assign motives. They will interpret your silence as distance. But projection belongs to the projector. This realization is liberating and lonely. Because once you stop negotiating your image, you also stop participating in certain dynamics. You no longer over-explain to soothe others. You no longer dilute your boundaries to maintain harmony. You no longer offer emotional transparency on demand. And not everyone is comfortable with that. Some will accuse you of becoming detached. Some will say you've changed. They are right. You have. But the change is not withdrawal from connection. It is withdrawal from performance. The train moves through tunnels now, darkness surrounds the windows, his reflection becomes clearer in the glass. There is something different in his posture. Less tension in the jaw. Less alertness in the eyes. Less readiness to defend. This is not apathy. It is a recalibrated nervous system. The body no longer interprets misunderstanding as immediate threat. And with that recalibration comes a deeper question, one that surfaces slowly like a shape emerging from fog. If you are always explaining to secure connection, what does connection look like without explanation? The train emerges from the tunnel into morning light. Buildings glow softly in early sun. He watches the city pass without narrating it internally. No commentary. No rehearsal. Just presence. And here is the paradox. When you stop trying to be understood, the people capable of truly seeing you often draw closer. Because there is nothing curated to decode. Nothing overly polished to navigate. Just clarity. Stillness. But this kind of presence requires something difficult. The willingness to let others be wrong about you. To let them carry incomplete narratives. To let silence stand. The train slows. Doors open again. He steps onto the platform of a new day, not transformed into someone else, but less fragmented than before. The mask still exists, it always will, society requires it. But it is no longer fused to identity. And as he walks up the stairs into open air, the final layer of the question settles. If you no longer need to be understood, who were you trying to convince all along? Was it them? Or was it the younger version of you who believed misunderstanding meant disappearance? The morning light feels different now. Softer. Wider. And somewhere inside, the answer is no longer urgent. Because you are no longer arguing for your existence. You are simply living it.